Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. Let's engage in a little thought exercise. Purpose of this is to do something that most critics don't do, and that is answer criticism of their criticism. With criticism of the criticism of the criticism. I don't really think that most people know what criticism is, or at least not how to deliver it in a constructive manner. You can't really blame them. It's not like it's their job to do it, and more often than not, we focus very much on our own personal perspectives, and we put a large amount of importance on that. It's completely common, there's nothing wrong with that, but if you spend a little bit of time looking at other people's opinions and other people's perspectives, it can strengthen your own and your ability to present an opinion that's hopefully a bit more nuanced and has more informative value. That's the difference between your average piece of criticism and criticism that is created for a purpose, to be useful. Consumer criticism is designed to provide what's hopefully a buyer's guide and inform people before they drop money on things. Because let's be honest, people don't have infinite money. So that form of criticism is pretty damn important. And I've always believed that, and that's what we're trying to provide on the channel to a greater or lesser extent. And we're pretty damn successful at it. And a lot of people seem to put a decent amount of value on what we have to say. Great. Fantastic. As long as it helps people buy good games, avoid bad games, that's phenomenal. However, there is a fundamental misunderstanding of the sort of criticism that we provide, and that is that it should appeal to absolutely everybody, and that it should be utterly unbiased, which is impossible on both fronts. When you provide an opinion, there is going to be a bias that exists because you are not a robot. Everything that you say has been affected by the things that have happened in your life. That has shaped you as a person, that has shaped your preferences, your likes and dislikes, and as a result, it is not possible to provide unbiased critique. What it is possible to do is attempt to set aside some of that bias. Can't get rid of all of it, but you can certainly try and set some of it aside. But more importantly, present information as to where you're coming from. Where do your biases lie? Can you identify where your personal biases lie? And then can you explain it to the audience? Because when you do that, you provide context to your opinion. When people know why you think the way that you do, they will hopefully understand the statements that you make. It is more often than not more important to explain that particular aspect of things than it is to express the opinion in the first place. This is pretty consistent with what I said about, say, the Game Awards. I feel it's more important to explain why something was nominated and why it won than whether it won in the first place. Those opinions are more valuable in and of themselves than the awards are, and the awards cease to have value if you do not express that reasoning. Now, we've had a good few weeks of videos that have been perceived as very negative, and that's certainly true when it comes to, say, Shadow Warrior 2, a game I genuinely did not like. But strangely enough, it's also something that seems to have stuck with Titanfall 2, a game that I specifically said that I did like. Now, I didn't enjoy the campaign aspect of it, but that shouldn't surprise anybody. That's very consistent with opinions I've expressed over the last few years when it comes to heavily scripted, short, linear campaigns. I don't really like them very much. I don't think they're particularly good, and they're very indicative of the sort of design philosophies that were embedded into first-person shooters for quite some time as a result of the modern military shooter, a subgenre which is progressively dying off as we go along. That's a good thing in my opinion, because games like Wolfenstein and Doom provide significantly better campaigns, as far as I'm concerned, and I've expressed as to why that is, and where my opinions come from. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take a thread of opinions from people that did not like what I had to say about Titanfall 2, and we're going to try and poke some holes in them, because it's fun to do that. Hey, if I can be criticized, then the people that criticize me can also be criticized, right? It's only fair play, turnabout, as it were. So we can give it a shot, and hopefully this will, at least for a couple of people, kind of explain the difference between what I try and do on this channel versus a random forum post, because really we have completely different goals, we have different purposes. I've seen a hell of a lot of people over the past few years get really, really angry at critics. It doesn't matter whether it's gaming or anything else. It's something that happens a lot. There's a great deal of hostility, and generally speaking, that hostility is not expressed in a constructive way, nor is it very accurate. It's usually just a personal attack. It's ad hominem. It's not helpful to the consumer, and really having consumers attacking other consumers or attacking the people that are just trying to help them is counterproductive. And frankly, it is part of the reason, I imagine, why we have so many anti-consumer practices that are tolerated in this industry, because we do have that vocal group of people that are obsessed with cutting off their nose to spite their face. It's probably the best way to describe it. So let's have a look at this thread. Let's quote these. We're going to quote them verbatim. Don't want to alter anything. Don't want to dishonestly represent people. And of course, I'm not going to call people out by name because that's not fair. But we will read off the comment in its entirety, and I'm going to provide my counterpoint to it. So let's go at the top of the thread, and let's go and have a gander at the highest rated comments and see which are valid and which, in my opinion, are not. Alright, first bit of criticism, pretty damn valid. Two things that bugged me, they say, in the multiplayer section. He doesn't seem to understand that the happy hour for the default network is set for US peak hours, and that you can set your own happy hour timers by making your own network and joining others. Because of this, it doesn't seem like he knows that you can join multiple networks, each with different happy hour times, and then switch your active network every hour to string together happy hour merit bonuses. You're right, I don't know that because the game never bothers to explain that. Firstly, the default network does not, in fact, set the happy hour to peak US time, unless peak US time is 3 a.m. I'm currently looking at it at 4 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon, and happy hour is in 11 hours. So I'm not really sure what's going on with that. I also haven't found any information in the game regarding networks, with the exception of a little blurb down to the bottom of Browse, which says join a network. Networks are social communities like clans or guilds. In a network, you can quickly join games with other members and collect bonus merits by playing your network's happy hour. Now, we already knew that. What we didn't know was that you can join multiple networks. Doesn't say that anywhere, and frankly, you'd assume that you couldn't, because that would be a little odd, wouldn't it? It's a cool piece of information. I wish they had put that in the game itself and made that abundantly clear, but they don't explain networks at any point. So it's understandable that one would not know that information. It's also wrong. Stringing together multiple network happy hour merit bonuses is an exploit and was patched out days after release. Secondly, the fact that merits are not credits. According to this, you get merits for playing, ranking up weapons, and you need a certain amount of merits to rank up to your next rank. You get credits for playing, ranking up factions, and advocate gifts, etc. The earn rate of credits is higher than the earn rate of merits, so when he says that merits are the currency by which you unlock things early, he's really misrepresenting the system. Not really. It is true that merits and credits are not the same thing. They're two separate currencies. However, when it comes to earning credits, unless you get them from advocate gifts, when you earn a merit, you also earn a credit. As a result, the currencies end up being very similar, although there are a couple of other ways to get a couple of additional credits, and there is no daily cap, so I was definitely wrong on that one. Earning credits is a little easier, but not by much. You don't earn a great number of them. I'm currently sitting at level 10 on 47 of the things, and if I wish to unlock, say, a different pilot boost, that is going to cost me 125 unless I acquire the appropriate level. The complaint was that most of these unlocks are behind fairly hefty level walls unless you earn enough credits to bypass said level walls, and you don't earn a lot of credits unless you happen to get some from an advocate gift, which is random. And I have never received credits from advocate gifts at level 10, which I think means I've played about 10 hours or so of multiplayer, give or take. If I look at my Origin playtime, then that seems to be about right. Bearing in mind, I got about 15, 16 hours on it, and 5 hours is how long it took me to finish the campaign. So, yeah, that's correct. That was a slight error on my part. I apologize for that, although it doesn't change the main point. And that's an issue with quite a lot of criticism that you see in these threads. Most of these replies are more like gotcha moments than anything else. Sometimes you get some good information, but it doesn't change the main point of the exercise. I mean, we could have called credits dollars, pounds, doolies, whatever the hell you damn well please, and the point would have remained the same, that the unlock process for a lot of these things like boosts is very, very slow. And as a result, that's where the complaint comes from. It doesn't really matter what we call the currency. Regardless, though, he's correct. It was an error, and errors do happen in 50-plus minute videos, and we generally annotate for that. When an error happens, and they do very frequently in written articles, it can be almost instantaneously edited. In a video, can't really happen unless you take down the entire video and redo it because you made a minor mistake. And sometimes we do take the videos down if the mistake is severe enough, otherwise we'll annotate. Now, onto a criticism that is certainly not valid and doesn't have any examples presented, we've got this one right here. You'd think for a channel that is prided on being knowledgeable and is this large, you would actually take a minute to learn the game. Well, I think that we did learn the game. Spent like 10 plus hours learning the multiplayer, really, and the majority of the points made are based on that experience. That was a slip-up on my part, no doubt about that, but it doesn't really change my criticism of the title, nor have we ever expressed that this channel is a big expert knowledge base. In fact, quite the opposite. You're on a channel that is, for the most part, based around first impressions, and as a result, is going to have fairly limited knowledge of the title. It's Buyer's Guide. It's a played-through demo of the title. It's not an in-depth 100-plus hour piece of expertise, and I frequently recommend these more dedicated monogame channels that play hundreds of hours of these games if you want to get that kind of information. Now, a great example of that was the people that play thousands of hours of Civilization don't go to my Civ 6 video for in-depth knowledge. And in fact, the subreddit for Civ was very understanding of that, whereas other subreddits have been, let's just say, less so. And I think that would be understandable were the videos ever presented as full in-depth reviews and whether they were presented as expert opinions, and they never, ever are. Another part of this post says, I believe he has had an effect on gamers that instilled this super cynical circle jerk atmosphere recently of hating every game. That would be a little tricky, considering I haven't really covered many games as of late, and the majority of coverage that I do of games is positive. I think there's an attitude, especially in online forums, where people tend to judge an entire body of work maybe by the past 2 weeks. I've seen swings back and forth, back and forth. When I have a few videos that are positive, I'll generally be accused of either shilling or not paying enough attention or losing my edge as a critic. When I have a few videos that are negative, apparently everything I've done over the past 6 years is just that, which is not true at all. And the weird thing is that this is presented on a video where I said the game was good. Kind of a bit of a head scratcher there. I'm not sure what's going on with that. Now, let's move on to another one of the very highly upvoted posts, which says this: honestly, I would advise against watching this if you want a good Titanfall 2 review. The game is very much about platforming, and TotalBiscuit, as he admits, hates first-person platforming. The campaign was really only second to Portal, I think, with its platforming. I thought it was pretty interesting to know what TB looks for in his FPS, but I completely disagree with him, and I think, as the review showed, he is out of touch with the larger community on this game. So here's where a lot of misunderstandings seem to crop up when it comes to what a critique actually is and what a good review is. Firstly, I don't do reviews. Guess what? The reply is like saying he's the one who will scream that he doesn't do reviews. Yeah, and you know why I will do that? Because it's wrong. If we have people going around saying that I do reviews when they're clearly not, then you end up misleading people, and that's a bad thing. Somebody goes and looks at a review, what they expect is that it is a complete assessment of the title based on having actually beaten the thing, having finished it, having spent a lot of time on it. I don't do that. And that's front-loaded information. That's something that we tell people time and time and time again. And you might say, well, what's the use of your videos then? Well, ask the people that watch them. You don't need every piece of coverage content, every piece of critique content to be a full-on formal review. There is great value, as has been demonstrated through the success of this channel and others, in providing a different kind of critique, a different kind of coverage. And lots of people enjoy it, lots of people get value from it. I do not do reviews, and it is misleading to say that. It would be dishonest of me to claim that I did reviews when I don't beat the game. And yes, I do believe that you have to have at least beaten the single-player campaign to do any sort of a review. Not to mention that when it comes to reviews, reviews are more formal assessments of titles, and our WTF Is series is very much informal. It's played live most of the time. Yes, it has the occasional mistake in it, and more often than not, there'll be a situation where we're playing the game and something crazy will happen, something funny will happen, or I will fail miserably, and that will be commented on. And there's an element of comedy to that, but it's also a real reaction. You know, you're taking the concept of what is now the reaction video, and you're using that to provide a form of critique that is more relatable. That is very different to the formal review. That's a completely different format. So, no, I mean, I would appreciate it if people would stop calling them reviews, because it can potentially mislead people, especially those that are not familiar with my content, and that can lead to somebody making a poor decision, and that is not cool. That is the exact opposite of what we're trying to do here. Anyway, going back to the point, the fact that I don't like first-person platforming is a very relevant piece of information, because there are plenty of other people that don't either. And what's important to know, especially when dealing with this campaign, is that there is a lot of that in it. Far, far more than there is in the multiplayer. And people would not necessarily be aware of that if they've only played the first game, which didn't have a single-player campaign. Of pieces of information that you could give about the campaign, the fact that it does have a fairly large focus on first-person platforming, at least in a few of the levels, is possibly the most important. And to express that I didn't like it on that basis, I think, again, is extremely important. We look at one of the most criticized levels in one of the most lauded titles of all time, Zen, in Half-Life 1, and we see just how many people are not big into first-person platforming. This is not something that's necessarily very popular, and to know that this game has a big focus on it, to the point where I got so angry at level 4 that I wasn't willing to fully complete it, is very relevant information. Let's toss the word review again out of the window, because that's entirely wrong. Let's refer to it as a good critique. To claim that it's not a good critique because it said that is head-scratching to me. Very much head-scratching. It's the notion that only people that are really into this very specific kind of game should look at the game, which is nonsensical, because of course there's going to be disagreement between myself and people that like the campaign. To say that there wouldn't be is completely redundant. Of course. Of course, I didn't like that aspect of the campaign. To assume that nobody else would dislike it on that basis is extremely close-minded. That piece of information is important, and I'm very glad that I expressed it. But what's important, along with that, is to express why I hold that opinion. And that comes on to one of the next points. It's not a review, since all of his videos are almost entirely biased. They're not almost entirely biased, they're all entirely biased, just like every other review or critique that has ever existed in the history of man, and any opinion that has ever been expressed. The idea that bias is a negative, the idea that bias is something that we should all go out of our way to expunge from our systems, is not only unrealistic, but impossible. Everybody's biased. The most important thing to do is to wear that bias on one's sleeve and to provide context for the bias, because then the bias is useful. That's a watermark that you can use, even if you don't share that opinion. The fact that I said that the single-player campaign had a decent amount of first-person platforming in it, and that I did not like it because I do not like first-person platforming, is useful information to somebody that does like first-person platforming, because it's not about whether or not I like the game, it's about whether or not you like the game relative to what I say about said game, giving you context to said opinion. I don't know why it is that some people believe that you have to agree with everything a critic says. That's silly. We're not here to validate your opinion. We're not here to make you feel better about your purchase. The fact that people watch my stuff after they've bought something is a bit of a head-scratcher to me, and it makes me scratch my head even more when they get angry that I didn't validate their purchase. That is not my job, nor was it ever, and it's certainly not the job of any critic. There's a dangerous amount of fanboy and tribalism surrounding gaming, and it tends to rear its ugly head every time you run into a situation like this. And of course, then you get terms like contrarian bandied around. And I address that in quite a few videos because I see it coming from a mile away. It's a very obvious supposed counter-argument, and it's fallacious for the most part, because it dismisses an opinion based on the idea that that opinion was not argued in good faith, which is nonsense. Again, I should point out that I said Titanfall 2 was a good game, just not based on its campaign, based on the thing that people will spend more than 5 hours playing, i.e. the meat of the game, the multiplayer. If you take anything away from this video, take that away from it, that bias is not only not a bad thing, but it is inherent to every single opinion, critique, and review piece that has ever existed, and vital to it. The byline is important. The person that creates the critique is just as important as the critique itself, assuming that you know where that person stands. You need to know where they're coming from. You have to understand why they believe what they believe. And if you wonder why my videos are so damn long, it's because I spend the time making sure that you do know that. There's no point in me saying this is good and this is bad. That's irrelevant. Why would you care? This is bad, this is good, 7 out of 10, 4 out of 10, scores. These are all irrelevant things. All that matters is the reasoning. That's the meat of it. Without the reasoning, the meal has no nutritional value. Let's move on to another comment. It's not the fact that he doesn't like the game, it says. It's the fact that by disliking the core mechanics so much, he doesn't have anything constructive to say. It's not a purposeful review. The irony, of course, of that comment being that it's not a constructive or purposeful comment, it doesn't point out any actual flaws with the video. The idea that running on the walls is the core mechanic of Titanfall 2 is, one, not true, and two, the idea that I dislike it is also not true, because it's just fine in the multiplayer. I mean, I like the first game for that very reason. It's just the level design in the single player is what I dislike. The focus on so much of that in the single player is what I dislike. And again, I think I've made a fairly strong argument that a 5-hour throwaway campaign is not the reason that you buy a $60 product, and it's not what keeps it on your hard drive. It's not what keeps you playing it. So disliking the campaign is not a reason not to buy it. This person goes on to say, a critic is supposed to critique a game, okay? Find faults in it, okay? And explain how it could be done better. No. Absolutely not. That is what a consultant is for. We are not here to fix your video games. We don't have to constructively criticize anything. We don't need to suggest how things could be improved because our concern is not the future of the title. That's the sort of thing that the active player base does because they want to stick around for years and years. They want to keep playing the game, so they actively suggest improvements in order to keep them playing the game. That is not what a critic does, unless they are hired to do that. What they are expected to do is explain their criticism. They are not expected to explain how to do it better. We are not armchair game designers. That is not our job. Does explaining how a certain mechanic could be done better influence in any way your purchase decision? Because if not, that's outside the remit of my job. My job is to tell you whether or not I think a game is worth buying and help you make an informed purchase decision. I am part of your toolbox. I should certainly not be the sole focus and the sole source of information. That would be a big mistake, and I've expressed that time and time again. Read widely, listen to people with different opinions, and then use your brain and make your decision based on that information. Critique does not, I repeat, does not have to suggest how things could be done better. Especially not consumer-orientated critique. That's the sort of thing that academic critique often deals with. That's the sort of thing that a think piece on Gama Sutra 3 months down the line will deal with. Not a piece of consumer-orientated criticism. Here's another flaw with the rest of his argument. By disliking it, all his criticisms will be made with a hypothetical game in mind that will appeal to him. No, that's what would happen if I did what you told me to do, which is to constructively criticize everything and suggest how it could be done better, because that is the hypothetical game. I'm not suggesting any sort of hypothetical game here. I'm saying that what is currently there, at least in terms of the single-player campaign, again, umpteenth reminder, I like Titanfall 2, and expressed as such, is worthy of criticism based on my personal opinions that were clearly explained. So that contradicts itself. We then go on to another part of the post, which says that the majority, it would seem, in Titanfall 2's case, like the game in the first place. That is completely irrelevant to any kind of opinion that I have given. My opinion is not based on the opinion of other people, because if it were, it wouldn't be my opinion in the first place. It's not my job to regurgitate the opinions of others, it is my job to come up with my own and explain why. It would be like, he says, criticizing Civilization for focusing so much on diplomacy. Well, if Civilization did focus too much on diplomacy at the expense of other game mechanics, especially if said game mechanic wasn't properly developed, then that would be a completely valid piece of criticism. It's especially important to express that to people and explain it, because if they didn't know that Civilization happened to focus as much as it did on diplomacy, which in the case of Civ 6 it certainly doesn't, but anyway, then that is the kind of thing that could potentially mislead them into buying something they would not like. So it's important to mention that. You could also criticize the nature of said diplomacy, because in reality, I did not criticize wall running in Titanfall 2. I criticized level design in Titanfall 2. Wall running is the mechanic that you use to interact with said level design. The criticism is not of the wall running in and of itself. In fact, the wall running works just fine. In fact, had you listened to the multiplayer segment of the video, you'd know that I actually wanted more of that, because I criticized the lack of verticality and the fairly linear 3-lane design of the Titanfall 2 maps. This is Also, by the way, since you seem to like popular opinions, a pretty damn popular opinion. This is the biggest criticism that a lot of people have leveled at Titanfall 2, and the reason why so many people were happy that Angel City is now in the map rotation. Now, one thing that I do agree with in his post, that in that sense, a critic should also look at what the original vision for the game was and review how well it realizes that vision. Yeah, absolutely. Authorial intent to me is quite important, and I don't believe in the death of the author, although if you do believe in the death of the author, then that sentence is incorrect. What you should be doing is actually prioritizing your own personal perspective as opposed to the intent of the creator. And you're totally right, but then you have to say, well, what exactly was the original vision of the creators? Was it that? Does that mean that everything that was put into the game is by its definition perfect because it was their original vision? Does that mean that we can't criticize their original vision? Because that's definitely not true. So what you would say is, does it properly realize that vision? Well, is that vision level 4? Because I would argue it's not, based on the fact that all the other levels aren't like that. My main criticism of the single-player campaign was not, in fact, the first-person platforming. It was something that I pointed out was an issue with level 4. It is, for the most part, not an issue with the other levels, although there are a couple of exceptions. My main issue with the campaign was, in fact, the way that it handled progression, which, again, you would know if you listened, but this is the problem with a lot of these criticisms, is that they don't deal with what I actually said, they deal with what the poster imagined I said. And there's a laser focus on this idea of platforming, when in reality that took up about 3 minutes of a 60 or so minute video. Final part of that post, the problem isn't that TB dislikes the single player, the problem is he's saying it's bad. Those are two wildly separate things. I don't recall ever saying it was bad. I actually said I didn't like it. Again, that's a falsehood, because I didn't ever say it was bad. And I expressed my opinion fairly well, I think, when it came to saying why I disliked it. There's a bit of a mix-up here when we have the rest of the post saying, well, you dislike the game because of the platforming, but then it's not because you dislike the game, it's because you said it was bad. No, I disliked the game because of primarily the way that it doesn't do progression in a single-player game very well, and a little bit of the platforming, which is tied into the map design, which is a completely separate argument. But, you know, that's, I think, hopefully a good example of why a lot of these sort of forum post critiques aren't very good, because half the time they're false, and the rest of the time they seem to have a fundamental lack of understanding of what a piece of consumer-orientated criticism actually involves and what its goal is. I suppose there's a nice little bit of irony in the sense that he says a critic should look at what the original vision was. Yes, you're now criticizing my video, but you didn't look at what the original vision for my video was and what its intent was. So, as a result, you're sort of guilty of the very thing you're accusing me of, but hey. Hypocrisy is irrelevant. We're all hypocrites. Every last one of us. And I'm certainly not going to nail anybody to the wall for that. We are guilty of it on a daily basis in our lives. It's very easy to be a hypocrite, and it's very difficult to stay consistent 100% of the time, even if you are a very truthful person, although it does bloody well help, by the way. And my opinion of Titanfall 2's campaign is very consistent with the opinion that I've expressed of campaigns of, say, Call of Duty and Medal of Honor, Warfighter, and similar linear MMSs over the past few years. Now, we're being a little bit negative up to this point, but let's look at a post that does things a little bit better. And this post is offering a counterpoint without necessarily trying to tear down the original point. It understands that more than one opinion can coexist. You don't need to destroy the opposing opinion in order to keep yours alive. That's not how it works. It's not a death match. It's not a debate contest. Now, this post says, I don't have any great love for first-person platformers, but the platforming in Titanfall 2 was a blast. The sense of speed and the total butt-clenching moments where every jump has to line up right is a refreshing experience in an FPS. Not to mention that the platforming is where the skill of the game comes from, especially in multiplayer. The game is about movement and shooting while moving super fast, and it's nice that the campaign really took that and ran with it. And there you go. A nice little respective counterpoint that does not in any way attack the original or the person behind it. Cool. If we had more of that, then these threads would be more constructive. It's a word that people seem to like to bandy around, yet not fully understand. Now, here's something that was addressed in the video, and people, again, seem to miss it, and this is the idea that I played the game in a boring way. That I played it more like Call of Duty, with less wall running and using aim-down sights at a moderate range. Yeah, I played it in the optimal way. Played it in the way that provided the path of least resistance. I feel that games that provide you with a path of least resistance and then turn around and say, oh, well, you didn't do it the more fun way, even though that path was in fact suboptimal, are not designed well. You can do that. You can play it in a different way, just as I could play it pistol only, just as I could play it with one hand behind my back, just as I could go and play Dark Souls in a suboptimal way. And hey, you could. You could go play the Wretched, or whatever the bloody hell the name of the thing with the wooden club and no pantaloons is. You could do that, but it's deliberately designed to be bad. It goes out of its way to do just that, and it provides you with that optional extra difficulty. If you wish to take the path of more resistance, that's cool, but the game was not designed with that in mind, and I think that that is well demonstrated by the idea that you can just mow people down without wall running. And my argument within the video was that the platforming, the wall running, was forced through level design. It was very much artificially enforced rather than encouraged by making it the optimal combat playstyle. The difference between the way that first-person platforming is done in the single-player campaign and what I think it should have involved is that most of the combat should actually happen on foot. That is the best way to fight because it is the most stable when it comes to aiming. It makes things easier. You can shoot somebody while running on a wall, but generally speaking, the levels aren't designed around that idea, and most of the wall running is required to avoid death from bottomless pits, not death from people. If it was death from people, that would be great. Now, maybe the hardest difficulty, as in the one above hard, encourages that, but I did play most of the game through on hard, and I found that actually, no, the best way to deal with things was often just to cloak, pick people off from a distance, headshot them, no problem at all. It was not to run on walls, because that generally got me shot. To some extent, by the way, that problem also extends to the multiplayer mode, simply because the level design lacks verticality, something again that I did address, and was less of an issue in the first game because there was more verticality, meaning that wall running made you less vulnerable. If you're wall running only about 3 feet above the ground, that doesn't make you hard to hit. In fact, arguably it makes you easier to hit because you are traveling in a straight line, which means that where you're going to be is predictable, and that makes you easier to shoot. So I think that that is not an especially good argument, but I definitely appreciate the original post that was expressing how he liked to play the game. And that's great. Dude, I mean, if you enjoyed the game that way, phenomenal. I'm really happy for you. I wish I could have. But I don't like going back to games and playing them suboptimally. I don't think that that's a great indication of good design. The fact that you can play it that way doesn't mean that you necessarily should play it that way, especially when most of the game is screaming at you not to, at least outside of the avoid the bottomless pit areas. That's what I would have liked to see. Hell, what would have been great is if I was fighting other pilots that were running on walls as well an awful lot. If that was like a key component of the campaign, that would be great, because then you're forced into that. Maybe you'd have incredible duels with pilots on walls and things like that. And that really didn't happen all that much. So that's what you will experience in the multiplayer, and that's where the wall running does come into its own, but is weakened somewhat by the poor level design of Titanfall 2's multiplayer maps. Fixable, thankfully, as we saw with Angel City. I had way more fun in Angel City than I did on the other maps, and I'm hoping that we see future map releases that go back to that particular style, because then I think I'll have a lot more fun with the game. However, as I said before, the argument, oh, I just tried to play it in the boring way, that's BS. I played it in the optimal way, and that's what the game told me to do. That's not what I told myself to do. If you want people to use the wall running in combat, you have to design the levels around that. And in my opinion, they did not. There's a good little follow-up post to that, by the way, that someone said, it needs to penalize people for playing it in the boring way. Something like Doom, where not staying mobile means getting killed. Yes! He gets it. It's not only the idea of getting killed, incidentally, the way that you're encouraged to get into a rhythm with Doom and bounce between enemies and use the kill animations to refill health and ammunition, that is how you encourage interesting playstyle. That's how you do it. Doom realizes that, Titanfall 2 does not. This is why I read these threads, by the way, because despite the fact that they are often full of personal insults towards me, or indeed lies about my content, there are interesting posts to be found here, and there's value to be found in expanding your horizons by reading them. So do read things that you disagree with, even if some of them happen to be wrong. Now, moving on to another part of the thread, and I don't like posts like these, and I'll explain why. I usually appreciate TB's content, but the flat-out mistakes he makes in this video, and this next part is admittedly just subjective, cool you've realized that, how much he dislikes the single-player campaign, while I found it quite fun, make this video, and here's Titanfall 2 opinions almost nonsensical to me. Okay, cool. Where are the flat-out mistakes? Because you mentioned them and then didn't tell me what they were. In fact, the rest of the post goes like this. I wish you would just say I don't like the game and the gameplay doesn't click with me and leave it at that. It's kind of what I did do, actually, with the campaign. I just did it in a way that explained why. I mean, you could just say that and leave it, but one, that would be a bloody short video, and secondly, it's completely useless. It doesn't matter what I like. It's not relevant. What I like and dislike is only relevant to me. What is relevant is why I don't like it. That's where the useful information comes from. So, going out and saying there are flat-out mistakes in the video and they're not listing a single one of them is annoying. And it happens a lot in threads like this. Like, he's wrong, blah, blah. But then it sort of trails off. It's like, I don't understand. Wait, what? Why? Why again? Can you explain why I didn't like it? Weird. He repeats it at the end of the video. Complaints are apparently entirely personal or due to a lack of time and experience with the game. But what? Tell me what? What complaints? Which complaints are due to lack of time and experience? Deadly silence ensues. A tumbleweed rolls across the plains. Alright, moving on. This video makes me wonder if TB is just controversial for views. Yes, of course. I create hour-long rambling videos about dry industry topics because I like to be controversial. Right. I liked the game. Can we just remind people of this? I liked the game. The campaign is not the main meat of the product. It's 5 hours with no foreseeable reason to replay it. That's not why you buy it. And if you did buy it because of that, and you think that that was worth $60, then more power to you. I certainly didn't. The platforming is amazing, he says. Best example of first-person platforming. TB, do you not like platforming in general? Doesn't mean the game is bad. You need to disclose that bias. I did! You didn't watch the video! That's where you have fallen into a very obvious lie. You didn't watch it. If you don't believe that I disclosed that bias, then you did not watch the video. I said it multiple times. In fact, to the point where people have mentioned it in the very thread. You don't get to go and say that after noticing that. This comment, incidentally, is also upvoted. You might be thinking I'm picking stuff from the bottom of the thread. No! This is the stuff that's upvoted. You don't want to read the stuff that's downloaded. Blah. Bad hombres, those people. And yet, somehow, TB likes the Infinite Warfare single-player. What a joke. One, calling somebody's opinion a joke because they like different things to you is fairly immature. Secondly, that is completely consistent with what you just said. You know what isn't an Infinite Warfare single-player? A lot of platforming. There's very, very little of it. You can use it, but you absolutely do not have to. There are no big levels full of bottomless pits. They are not there. And that, if anything, is one of the reasons why I like it a little bit more than Titanfall 2's. I also like it because I feel the story is a little bit more sci-fi cheese, and I enjoy very much that idea. It's got space combat in it, which I found to be a lot of fun, and it has actual progression in terms of strength of enemies and the strength of your arsenal. These are things that Titanfall 2 does not have, and if only I'd explained that in the video. Oh, wait, that's what I spent most of the time talking about. But there you go. We're not allowed to like Infinite Warfare single player, folks. It has been decreed by the arbitrator on high. Was it arbiter? It's arbitrator, right? Yes. Arbitration. Arbitrator, of course. Here's you now. I stopped watching when he said the campaign was a waste of resources. Well, that's unfortunate, because I like the rest of it. You probably should have kept watching. I'm allowed to believe that. I mean, hell, even if it was the best goddamn FPS campaign I've played in years, it's still only 5 hours with no replayability. So, to argue that it is a big value add to a $60 product is, as far as I'm concerned, fallacious. The rest of the post says, I can't help myself, but to me, this looked like he pulled stuff out of his ass to down-talk it in his usual punchy way. What stuff? You didn't say... You know, there's this lovely sense of irony that earlier in the thread, there's arguments that I don't understand what a critique is, and yet it's blindingly obvious that most of the thread doesn't understand what a critique is. In order to criticize something, you actually have to justify your criticism. So if you think I'm pulling things out of my arse, you better start listing them. Otherwise, that argument holds very little water, I'm afraid. That pretty much sums up, I think, all of the major upvoted posts in that thread. I'm not going to deal with the stuff that was downvoted to oblivion, and I think, honestly, what we have is a bit of a tribalistic response. Titanfall 2 commercially is not doing as well as some people believe that it should. And you know what? I'm actually on their side. That's the annoying thing about this. I really like the multiplayer, and I also enjoyed the first game. I think of the 3 first-person shooters that came out within the last month, this game, by far, has the strongest multiplayer. And the multiplayer is what keeps people actually playing the game beyond the first week. So, Titanfall 2, if you're looking for a multiplayer shooter, is of those 3 games, that being Titanfall 2, Battlefield 1, and Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, the better buy. So, it's very odd to see a group of people that want this game to succeed turn around and go after somebody who also has expressed that they want the multiplayer to succeed and has expressed that the multiplayer is a good thing. But apparently you're not allowed to criticize anything about the product. I'm sorry, it ain't bloody perfect. It's not. Even if it didn't have a campaign, it still wouldn't be perfect. There are things that in the multiplayer that I don't think are very good, including, but not least of which, map design, which most of the community agrees with me on in the first place. Not that having the popular opinion makes you right by any stretch of the imagination, which is why the whole idea of contrarianism is nonsense. You don't have to have the popular opinion to win, as should have been demonstrated by the recent US presidential election. One way or the other, I'd just like people to think a little bit more in depth about criticism, and about the purpose of criticism, and about the purpose of videos like this. They are not designed to insult you. They are not designed to invalidate your purchase. If you are already enjoying the game, my opinion of it should be utterly irrelevant to you. They are designed to provide an opinion and a perspective that is well explained. And sometimes that perspective is not something that's all that popular. Sometimes it's a minority opinion. But you realize why dissenting opinions are so important in things like court cases, right? Providing an alternate perspective is often more influential than providing the popular perspective. It's often more important to have that perspective represented, because we don't just buy games based on one review or one critique or one stream, and if we do, we're a little bit silly. More than one perspective is valuable, and we must have that. And attempting to enforce conformity, attempting to attack a critic because he doesn't believe the same thing you do, is, in and of itself, making the games industry worse. It is trying to reduce the diversity of opinion, and that means that you have less useful tools in your toolbox when it comes to deciding whether or not a $60 title is worthy of your money. And trust me when I say this, you are the person that cares more about that than I do. I don't have to pay for my video games. You do. And it's my job to make sure that you make a good choice in that regard. I don't want you wasting your money. I don't care if I waste my money, that's a business expense. And more often than not, those games are coming through as free copies anyway. It's irrelevant. I didn't pay for Titanfall 2. It wasn't a review copy, but I got a promo code from somebody else. So, is it really relevant to me? No. It's quite nice to have the lack of attachment to the dollar amount, because there can be undue bias that creeps in as a result of you having paid money for it. And it can swing both ways. Either you can get super angry that you've paid for something that you didn't like, or you can justify it to yourself. You've got this whole buyer's remorse thing. You want to confirm your purchase. You want to feel like you've made the right call, because it doesn't feel good to feel like you've made the wrong decision. Don't blame you for that. It's a perfectly human thing. But then again, the sort of people that generally express these rather antagonistic opinions also seem to be people that want to set rules for thee, but not for me. They want the privilege of being able to feel that way, but if anybody else feels that way, then they will come under personal and professional attack. Hopefully this video gave you a little bit of perspective on my perspective, and those things are always important. Listen to others, listen to people that don't have the same opinion as you, And for the love of God, understand that not everybody is going to enjoy the same things you do, and the purpose of a critique is not to provide an unbiased opinion, because those things don't exist. Do not mistake the pursuit of objectivity for actual objectivity. The attempt to put yourself in other people's shoes is important, and I try and do that. I try and do that by expressing my own bias and allowing you to judge relative to that. I do try and provide different perspectives where I can, but of course I'm just one person, I can't understand them all. I guess I better make a couple of videos over the next couple of weeks that are nice to video games, and then people will forget all about this until the cycle repeats itself. It's a little sad, really, to say the least. But at least I know that the majority of my audience gets where I'm coming from and gets what I'm trying to do. That's to help them. Simple as that. My name's been TotalBiscuit, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, by all means, feel free to click the like button. If you did not, I know exactly what you're going to go and do. I'll see you next time.